So Unit 4 is all going to be about the nervous system, and we're going to break it up into 3 PowerPoints and probably a million videos. Maybe not a million, but we're going to have a bunch of different discussions. And really what the nervous system is supposed to do, it communicates with muscles and glands and other neurons. This is going to be a fast way of getting information from point A to point B. Our brain has a slower, long-term way of doing that too, and that's going to be called the endocrine system. So here, what you're seeing is the anterior and posterior pituitary gland, and what it does is it makes hormones that it sends throughout the body, and it's sort of a long-term message because, for instance, with growth, you don't do it instantly, you do it over the course of a small amount of time, so months. Also, it uses blood to eventually go to those glands or to tell it what to do, and basically it's going to be a gland to brain sort of message, and it uses hormones to do that. And really the big players here are going to be the pituitary glands and the thing that sort of surveys the body through homeostasis called the hypothalamus. So this is going to be really the main focus of Bio 202. But we're going to focus on this faster message. It's not long term because it basically sends a quick pulse to the areas that need to do something, and it's done through a chemical, then electrical, and then back to a chemical response to tell, let's say, a muscle to do something or act upon something. When we talk about the neural system, there's basically 2 things we're talking about. Central nervous system, this is going to be your brain and spinal cord. This is the hub of where all information comes to and eventually leaves from. And they're integral in controlling the nervous system, and basically what they do is they tell our next thing what to do. That's the peripheral nervous system, or PNS. So the PNS is going to be on the muscles themselves, on your hands, fingers, all over where we're sensing information. So the areas that we kind of think about are going to be our spinal nerves and our cranial nerves, and they're going to do 2 different things. They're going to do sensory, which is called afferent. Sensory is that it picks up some sort of environmental stimuli that it's got to react to. So, for instance, you put your hand on something hot. The sensory is going to go ahead and send a message to your central nervous system via the spinal cord to your brain to say, hey, the temperature is not doing so well, something's up. They're going to send a message back to your efferent division, which is your motor division, to basically move off of that hot plate or whatever you're touching. So this has to happen really quickly. If this was going to be done with hormones through the blood system, kind of like with the endocrine system that we're going to talk about all in 202, you would be dead by the time it got that message. It would take a long time to get there. But this takes a really fast amount of time. There's 2 basic different types of nervous cells that we're going to be talking about. There's a nervous cell, which we think about as neurons, and they respond to stimuli with electrochemical, which means electrical and chemical activity, and they do that with ions moving through these special gates called voltage gates. And it's basically what we're going to do is change the charge on something on the outside of the neuron and be able to move that neural activity from one area to another pretty quickly, and to get that electrical energy to eventually, let's say, to a muscle to move something. The next thing is going to be the glial cells, or neuroglia. They're support cells, and this is going to be the majority of the nervous system that we have. 10 out of 1 cells are going to be neural glands. They're going to be just designed to give the neuron blood or help keep it alive, and we'll name them in the next few minutes. So we have a couple, and what I'm going to do is I have a sheet for you that hopefully you got in class, but we're going to be filling this out as we go through. There is the central nervous system glial cells, and there's different types of glial cells. And the first one is going to be the astrocytes. They're the most abundant glial cell. Their cellular processes are really around the axon terminals and surrounding capillaries. So what you could see here is, here's an axon, here is the astrocytes, and then here are some capillaries. So really it's designed for a couple things. One, can you see how it sort of anchors this neuron in place? If not, it'd just be floating around willy-nilly. So by having it held together, it's going to anchor this axon to these capillaries and make sure there's not too much movement. The other thing it's going to do, of course, what comes out of capillaries is going to be gas exchange, food, nutrients, and that's going to go to the axons themselves. 25% of all calories that you intake goes right to your axons, your brain. So it's a very intensive area of your body, and the more you study, the more you burn calories, which is kind of crazy. It also is designed to control chemical environments around the neurons. It uptakes potassium and ions for the neurotransmitter and stores them if there's ever a problem. But the thing that you've probably heard of with the brain is that there's this blood-brain barrier, BBB. And basically what that does is it prevents some things from getting into the brain. So here's my little picture of this cop, and basically what happens is the items usually want to get into the brain, and only a few things could get in there. They have to be kind of small. They can't be a lipid. There's only a few lipids that could make it there, and it's usually in a drug form. And it has to pass this sort of stringent process before it can get to the brain. If not, then viruses and bacteria and things like that would get to the brain all the time, and we'd have issues. If you have high blood pressure, what ends up happening is that blood-brain barrier gets a little leaky, and that's when people with really high blood pressure and items like that could actually have brain infections. And of course, trauma. Microglial cells, so micro means tiny, glial cells, they're for cellular processes. They help touch cells from neighbor to neighbor, and they're monitoring health. So if one axon has a problem, it's going to either try to repair it or it's going to kill it. Its main function is for immunity. So anything that comes around, it's going to try to kill it, like bacteria, viruses, it's going to destroy. Our next one is called the ependymal cells. They are ciliated, which means that they have these little hairs on them, and they're designed to circulate spinal fluid. And that spinal fluid helps insulate cells and gives them the nutrients they need. They line cavities of the brain and the spinal cord, and this helps make a permeable barrier layer that allows some things in and not everything out. Keeping in mind, we're still talking about the central nervous system. The one thing that we're going to are oligodendrocytes. And basically what they do is they're a process that starts to make these myelin sheaths. And we're going to talk about them soon, but these myelin sheaths make it so electrical energy can go from one area of the axon to another much, much, much quicker. If these myelin sheaths weren't around, what would happen is that electrical energy could get dispersed and maybe not make it to where it needs to go. Plus, it would take a lot longer to get there. So by having this myelin sheath, it's going to make it so electrical energy can go from one area to another much, much quicker, and that electrical current doesn't get diffused out. This is kind of why you have wiring behind your house that's covered in plastic. It does the same exact thing. It protects the electrical energy from going from one direction to another, and it makes it so that electrical energy doesn't diffuse out from that wire until it gets to where it needs to go. Okay, So now we are talking about a cell that is in the PNS, and they're going to be called Schwann cells. They make those myelin sheets, those coverings for the neuron to help make it so electrical energy doesn't get diffused and moves around a little faster. And then finally we have these satellite cells. That's this thing that sort of hangs around over here. And what it's believed is that it acts very similar to the astrocytes, and that's the one that sort of helps with physical support, connections to capillaries, and then even helps with potassium uptake. But we're not 100% sure what they do. There's still a lot of debate as to what these satellite cells do. And then the neuron itself. There are a bunch of different parts of the neuron, and they have different functions. There's the cell body. This is where all the organelles hang out. The mitochondria, the rough ER, the smooth ER, the nucleus. All those things hang out in the cell body. The dendrites, that's that long thing that sort of comes off of the neuron. It extends, well, let me show you a picture of it while I'm kind of just jibber-jabbering about it. The dendrites extend from the cell body and receives information from the brain or other neurons. So that's these guys right over here. Here is the cell body. The axon, this is this part that comes off of it. That's that longest part. Connects to dendrites of another neural cell. So basically here's a neural cell, here's the axon, and here will be another neural cell, so it can kind of move it from one area to another. They could be 1 millimeter in length, like in our brain, or they could be 1 meter long, and it depends on how tall you are, really. It's going to go from the base of your spine all the way to the biggest toe, and that's how long your longest axon is, so everybody's a little different in height. Axon hillock, that is going to be this end area. This is where the cell body meets the axon. And then the axon terminal, that's going to be at the end. It's going to be the area that will connect to another axon. In our next video, we'll talk about types of neurons.